Have you ever discovered that the person who hurt you the most wasn't a stranger? It was your own family? My name is Martha Foster, and 5 years ago, my older brother James Foster destroyed the only place that still felt like home. He didn't ask for my permission. He didn't warn me. He simply sold our childhood house behind my back and disappeared with the money. That day, I believed I had lost everything. What I didn't know was that life was quietly preparing something far greater. 5 years later, the same brother who called me weak would stand at my front door with tears in his eyes, begging me to save the family he once chose over me. But before I tell you what happened, you need to know how it all began. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle. Our parents weren't wealthy. My father, Robert Foster, spent nearly 30 years working as a school bus driver. My mother, Evelyn Foster, worked part-time at the local library. They never had much money, but they gave us something far more valuable: a peaceful home filled with love. When Mom became sick with cancer, I was 26. I took unpaid leave from work to care for her every single day. James visited once every few weeks. He always claimed he was too busy building his real estate business. Mom never complained. She just smiled whenever he walked through the door. 6 months later, she was gone. Dad tried to stay strong, but losing the love of his life broke him. Less than a year later, he suffered a heart attack. Before he passed away, he held my hand and whispered something I'll never forget. "Promise me one thing, Martha. No matter what happens, never let this family fall apart." I promised him. I truly meant it. After Dad's funeral, James handled all the legal paperwork. He said it would make everything easier. I trusted him completely. After all, he was my brother. A few weeks later, I returned to work. Life slowly started moving again. Then one Friday afternoon, everything changed. I drove to our childhood home to water Mom's roses, but as I turned onto the street, my heart stopped. There was a large white sign planted in the front yard. Sold. Workers were carrying furniture outside. A moving truck blocked the driveway. I jumped out of my car and ran toward the front porch. A woman I had never seen before opened the door. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "Can I help you?" I stared at her in complete shock. "This is my house." She looked confused. "We bought this property last week." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. No, there has to be some mistake. She slowly handed me a business card for the real estate agency. The previous owner signed all the documents himself. At that exact moment, my phone started ringing. The screen showed one name, James. I answered immediately. "James, what's going on?" His voice was calm, almost cold. "Martha, I sold the house." My entire body froze. I sold the house. Those 4 words echoed in my head for what felt like forever. I couldn't even breathe. "What do you mean you sold the house?" I whispered. "Our parents left it to both of us." James sighed as if I were wasting his time. "Legally, I handled everything after Dad died. Selling it was the smartest decision." "The smartest decision?" I cried. "You didn't even tell me." "There wasn't anything to discuss," he replied. "You needed money, whether you realized it or not. I never asked you to sell our home." There was a long silence. Then he said something that broke my heart. "It's just a house, Martha. Stop being so emotional." A house? To him, it was just a building. To me, it was every birthday, every Christmas morning, every memory of Mom baking apple pie, every evening Dad sat on the porch telling us stories. I hung up without saying another word. The new owners looked at me with sympathy, but there was nothing they could do. The sale was complete. I stood on the sidewalk, staring at the front door one last time. Then I quietly walked away. That night, James transferred a small amount of money into my bank account. There was only one message attached: "Your share." I almost laughed. The amount wasn't even close to half of what the house was worth. I called him again. "You cheated me." "No," he answered confidently. "After legal fees, taxes, repairs, and commissions, that's what was left." I knew he was lying, but I had no proof. For weeks, I barely slept. I rented a tiny apartment on the edge of Seattle. It was old, noisy, and far from my job. Some nights I sat on the floor surrounded by unopened boxes, wondering how my own brother could betray me so easily. Friends told me to hire a lawyer. I met with 2 different attorneys. Both gave me the same answer. If you can prove fraud, you have a case. But proving fraud required documents I didn't have. James had made sure of that. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. One evening, while cleaning out the last box from my parents' house, I found my mother's old notebook. Inside was a handwritten note. Martha, life will not always be fair. Some people will choose money over love. When that happens, don't waste your life chasing revenge. Build a life so beautiful that their choices can never destroy your future. I read those words over and over again. That night, I made a promise to myself. I would stop crying over what I had lost. Instead, I would build something no one could ever take away from me. I enrolled in evening business classes while working full-time. Every dollar I earned, I saved. I stopped buying unnecessary things. I studied late into the night. There were days I wanted to quit. But every time I remembered James's voice, "It's just a house," I worked even harder. 2 years later, I quit my receptionist job and opened a small home interior design company. At first, I had only 3 clients, then 10, then 50. Within 5 years, my company was designing luxury homes across Washington state. The woman who had once cried because she had nowhere to go now owned a successful business, a beautiful office, and the home she had dreamed of. I no longer needed revenge. Life had already rewarded my hard work. But I had no idea that James Foster's perfect life was about to fall apart, and soon, he would come looking for the sister he had abandoned. 5 years passed. I hadn't spoken to James once, not on birthdays, not on Christmas, not even when mutual friends mentioned his name. As far as I was concerned, he was no longer my brother. One rainy Monday morning, I arrived at my office before everyone else. Our company had just signed the biggest contract in its history, a luxury apartment project worth several $1,000,000. For the first time in years, I felt proud of the life I had built. No bitterness, no anger, just peace. Around noon, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Martha, there's someone here asking to see you. I don't have an appointment," I replied without looking up. "He says he's your brother." My hands froze above the keyboard. "James, after 5 years." I took a deep breath. "Send him in." The door slowly opened. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident man who once wore expensive suits now looked exhausted. His jacket was wrinkled. His beard was unshaven. Dark circles surrounded his eyes. He looked like someone who hadn't slept in weeks. He stood there silently. Then, in a voice I had never heard before, he said, "Hi, Martha." I simply nodded. "What do you want?" He looked down at the floor. "I need your help." I couldn't help but remember the day I begged him not to sell our parents' house. Back then, he hadn't listened to a single word. Now our roles had changed. "What happened?" I asked calmly. James let out a long sigh. "My real estate company collapsed." I said nothing. He continued. "I invested in several commercial properties. Then the market slowed down. I borrowed more money to keep the business alive. It only made things worse." He swallowed hard before speaking again. "The bank is taking everything. My office, my house, my savings." I quietly listened. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would feel happy, satisfied, victorious. But instead, I only felt sadness. Not because he had lost everything, because he had thrown away his family long before he lost his money. Then he looked directly into my eyes. "My wife wants to leave. If we lose our home, my children won't have anywhere to go." His voice cracked. I don't know who else to ask. The room fell silent. Finally, he reached into his bag and placed a worn envelope on my desk. I found these while cleaning Dad's old storage unit. Curious, I opened it. Inside were copies of my father's original estate documents. As I read them, my heart began pounding. The house had never belonged to James alone. Dad had clearly written that everything was to be divided equally between both children. Then I noticed something else. A signature. It wasn't mine. Someone had signed my name. A fake signature. I slowly looked back at James. You forged my signature." Tears filled his eyes. He couldn't even deny it. He simply whispered, "I'm sorry. For 5 long years, I had blamed myself for being too weak. Now I finally knew the truth. He hadn't just betrayed me, he had stolen from me. And now, he needed the forgiveness of the sister he had once destroyed." James couldn't even look me in the eye. "I'm sorry," he whispered again. "I know those words don't fix anything." I stared at the forged signature for a long moment before carefully placing the documents back into the envelope. "You didn't just steal a house, James," I said quietly. "You stole my memories, my trust, and 5 years of my life." Tears rolled down his face. "I know. I was greedy. I thought money mattered more. I was wrong. For the first time in years, I believed him, not because of his words, because life had already punished him more than I ever could. He had lost his business, his reputation, almost his family. Then he asked the question I knew was coming. Will you help me? I leaned back in my chair. I can. His eyes filled with hope. But I won't do it for free. He nodded immediately. I'll do anything. I slid the envelope across the desk. Tomorrow morning, we're going to see my lawyer. His face turned pale. My lawyer will reopen the estate case. We'll prove that my signature was forged. James lowered his head. If that's what you want, I'll confess, I continued. And after that, we're holding a family meeting. Our relatives, our old neighbors, everyone who believed I abandoned Mom and Dad's house. His shoulders shook. You told them I agreed to sell it, didn't you? He couldn't answer. His silence was all the answer I needed. For 5 years, people believed I had taken the money and walked away. My own reputation had been destroyed because of his lies. I want the truth, I said, not because I need revenge, but because lies should never become someone's legacy. The next morning, James signed a sworn statement admitting everything. He confessed that he had forged my signature. He admitted that he had kept most of the money. He accepted full legal responsibility. A week later, our lawyer reached a settlement. Since the original house could never be recovered, James agreed to repay my rightful share over time by selling the few remaining assets he still owned. Then came the hardest part, the family meeting. Nearly 30 relatives filled my aunt's living room. Everyone expected another argument. Instead, James stood up first. His hands were shaking. I owe Martha an apology. The room fell silent. I lied to every one of you. I told you she agreed to sell our parents' house. She never did. I forged her signature. I stole her inheritance. I destroyed our relationship because I wanted more money. Several people gasped. My aunt covered her mouth in shock. An older cousin slowly stood up. You mean Martha was innocent all these years? James nodded. Yes, I was the one who betrayed our family. The room became completely silent. For the first time in 5 years, the truth finally belonged to everyone. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt the weight lifting off my shoulders. After everyone left that evening, James stayed behind. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, he looked at me and said, I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know, if I could go back, I'd choose my sister over the money. I looked at him quietly. When Dad was dying, I said, he asked me to keep this family together. I spent years thinking I had failed him. But the truth is, you were the one who broke this family. James lowered his head. I know. A few weeks later, the legal process was complete. James sold what was left of his business and repaid every dollar that belonged to me. He also wrote a public letter admitting what he had done and apologizing to everyone he had lied to. He lost almost everything. But this time, it wasn't because of bad luck. It was because of his own choices. As for me, I didn't use the money to buy a bigger house. Instead, I did something my parents would have loved. I created the Robert and Evelyn Foster Family Foundation, a small charity that helped families who were at risk of losing their homes after unexpected tragedies. Every year, dozens of families received help because of it. One afternoon, nearly a year later, I received an invitation. It was from James. His oldest daughter was graduating from high school. At the bottom of the invitation, He had written one sentence. "I understand if you don't come, but it would mean everything to us if you did." I stared at the card for a long time. Then I smiled, not because the pain had disappeared, but because it no longer controlled my life. I went to the graduation. When James saw me sitting in the audience, tears filled his eyes. He walked over during the reception. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a second chance." I answered honestly. "I didn't give you a second chance, James. You earned it by finally telling the truth." He nodded. For the first time in years, there was no anger between us, only lessons. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the house we had lost. For years, I believed that home was a place. I was wrong. A home isn't built with walls. It's built with honesty, love, and the people who choose you, even when life becomes difficult. James lost all of that because of greed. I found it because I refused to let bitterness define my future. And that's when I realized something. The greatest revenge isn't watching someone fall. It's rising so high that their betrayal can no longer reach you. If someone has ever betrayed your trust, remember this. Don't waste your life proving them wrong. Build a life so meaningful that one day they'll realize what they lost when they chose to lose you.